Thank you very much, Alex. Gary, are you ready?
Yes, I am. O thou kind Lord, thou hast created all humanity from the same stock. Thou hast decreed that all shall belong to the same household. In thy holy presence, they are all thy servants, and all mankind are sheltered beneath thy tabernacle. All have gathered together at thy table of bounty. All are illumined through the light of thy providence. O God, thou art kind to all. Thou hast provided for all, dost shelter all, conferrest life upon all. Thou hast endowed each and all with talents and faculties, and all are submerged in the ocean of thy mercy. O thou kind Lord, unite all. Let the religions agree and make the nations one, so that they may see each other as one family and the whole earth as one home. May they all live together in perfect harmony. O God, raise aloft the banner of the oneness of mankind. O God, establish the most great peace. Cement thou, O God, the hearts together. O thou kind Father God, gladden our hearts through the fragrance of thy love. Brighten our eyes through the light of thy guidance. Delight our ears with the melody of thy word, and shelter us all in the stronghold of thy providence. Thou art the mighty and powerful. Thou art the forgiving, and thou art the one who overlooketh the shortcomings of all mankind.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Gary. Yasmin Jahan, are you ready? You have to unmute yourself, Sabah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. What Abdu'l-Baha meant about the women arising for peace is that this is a matter which vitally affects women, and when they form a conscious and overwhelming mass of public opinion against war, there can be no war. The Baha'i women are already organized through being members of the faith and the administrative order. No further organization is needed. But they should, through teaching and through the active moral support they give to every movement directed towards peace, seek to exert a strong influence on other women's minds in regard to this essential matter. So you find it from Lights of Guidance.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Yasmin Jahan. Jane, are you ready?
Yes. I'm humbled to introduce Dr. Nader Saiedi, preeminent scholar, author, and professor, and much sought-after speaker, with a distinguished career spanning over 4 decades. Born in Tehran, Dr. Saiedi received an MS in economics from Pahlavi University in Iran and a PhD from the University of Wisconsin. He dedicated more than 25 years to teaching sociology at Carleton College before moving to UCLA to become the inaugural professor of Baha'i Studies. His academic interests encompass Babi and Baha'i studies, social theory, Iranian studies, and peace studies, and among his many publications, 2 stand out for the English reader: Logos and Civilization and The Gate of the Heart. His groundbreaking study, Logos and Civilization, in 2000, is described as an original and probing investigation of the writings of Baha'u'llah, the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith, which offers a vision of global unity that can unite religions, races, and nations. Drawing on the vast body of previously untranslated original Persian and Arabic texts, the book addresses key controversies and problems in the current academic literature about Baha'u'llah's writings. The second book, published in 2008, The Gate of the Heart, offers the first in-depth introduction to the writings of the Bab, prophet and forerunner of Baha'u'llah. The work is an essential resource for anyone wishing to understand the theological foundations of the Baha'i religion and Bab's significance in religious history. To better appreciate this work, let me share some reactions from his readers. I quote, For the scholar and layman alike, there's plenty in this book to feast on. Nothing is inconsequential. Every word is a worthwhile study, a book that explains many misunderstandings. I find myself rereading passages several times in one sitting due to the depth of content to be reflected upon and absorbed. It's a compelling read, a must-read, for anyone interested in the most amazing religious upheaval of the 19th century or in the roots of the Baha'i faith. A mystical bonanza. If you're interested in the mythical, the metaphysical, and the transcendent, all while wanting to know more about the secrets and signs in life, this book is fantastic. It's reordering my worldview. Some information clears up old questions. What a find. It's Rumi on steroids. And as a professor of psychology, I was intrigued to find gems throughout the text on the Bab psychology. The title of the text emphasizes this. It is through the gate of one's inmost being, one's heart, that spiritual knowledge is to be found. This thought echoes the words of Baha'u'llah himself. He shares, "The things he has reserved for himself are the city of men's hearts, that he may cleanse them from all earthly defilements and enable them to draw nigh unto the hallowed spot, which the hands of the infidel can never profane. Open, O people, the city of the human heart with the key of your utterance." Dr. Saiedi has helped open our hearts with his work, bringing us closer to the wisdom of both Baha'u'llah and the Bab. Tonight, we are privileged to hear him address the dream of peace, a Baha'i perspective. Dr. Saiedi?
Thank you very much. This was a very extensive and very kind introduction, and I'm honored by it. I'm happy to be present among you, and thank Dr. Bashir Elahi and others for giving me this opportunity to be here. The topic, as it was mentioned, is the dream of peace. There is a reason that I chose the topic not as peace, but as the dream of peace. The main reason for this is that when you look at varieties of cultures, spiritual traditions of the past, we witness the centrality of the concept of peace. Peace is a fundamental value, and emphasis on that is widespread in scriptures, in varieties of traditions, and so on. But at the same time, peace remains just a dream. When you look at the way peace is discussed, peace is defined as something that would happen in the distant future. Sometimes this future is defined as the end of the time. A lot of millenarian movements, for example, in varieties of religious traditions, are partly defined by the fact that they express the idea that through the millennium, peace would be realized on earth. But at the same time, as I mentioned, usually, not always, but usually this millenarian idea is accompanied with the idea that that is really the end of the time. Peace is defined as something which is a dream, but not an actual practical reality possible at the level of practical history. So it remains within these traditions, peace remains just purely a moral statement. The idea is that peace is something good, and therefore the extent of discussion of peace is that peace is in accordance with the will of God, is is a moral, spiritual element, and so it remains an idealistic, moralistic statement. One of the most beautiful expressions of peace, of course, can be found in the Bible. Isaiah talks of peace, but the way he discusses peace, which is so beautiful, he talks of the time that the earth would be filled with the knowledge of God. That is very important. Knowledge of God would fill the earth. And because of that, in this situation, the wolf and lamb would live together. Lamb would no longer be a target of the wolf, would not be devoured by the wolf. It's a situation that, according to Isaiah, lion would eat grass like the cows, and children would play with very dangerous snakes. So these expressions of peace, which are extremely poetic and beautiful, as you can see, it is presented really as a dream, as opposed to the reality. Namely, the peace is defined as a situation in which the laws existing at the level of the world would be completely transformed. In reality, of course, a lion, if doesn't eat meat, would die. The reality at the level of nature is what Darwinian theory would call a struggle for existence. And this law of nature in the vision of Isaiah would be eliminated and replaced by a totally different situation. And why this happens? Because the earth is filled with the knowledge of God, the spiritual consciousness. Spiritual consciousness is going to regulate the world. And for that reason, peace is going to be realized. Not only the way peace is discussed remains just a moral statement, and it is presented as if it belongs to a poetic future, in reality, impossible future. But also within varieties of traditions, while peace is emphasized, at the same time, at the practical level, you can find discussions, teachings, ideas, doctrines within traditional discourse, which actually contradict the principle of peace. When you look at past traditions, even the ideas of many mystics of the past and so on, you see that they are not challenging, for instance, slavery. They are not challenging extremes of patriarchy. Varieties of distinctions among different groups, for example, many times even religious, spiritual, mystical tradition becomes a way of creating unity and therefore peace within one's own group. But that becomes at the same time an opposition and contrast with the others, in which many of the elements of double standard of morality directly or indirectly becomes justified by this sense of closed membership. So in varieties of ways, we see that the concept of peace remains a dream. yet it is a central value. Namely, it is very clear that the truth of varieties of divine scriptures are affirming this. As Isaiah mentioned, the knowledge of God would necessitate such a situation of peace. Namely, the truth of the spirituality, the truth of the spiritual character of being requires peace. Peace becomes the ultimate value, in a sense, the ultimate reality, and yet it remains a dream which is difficult to access. In the writings of Baha'u'llah, we see a very different situation. And so for discussion of that, I'm going to first talk about a dream of Baha'u'llah, and briefly the relation of that to peace. And then I'm going to briefly discuss his messages, his letters to the rulers of the world, and how that would relate to the question of peace, and how this general Baha'i perspective relates to the issues that Isaiah was discussing. Really, Isaiah was addressing the cultural struggle for existence and the transcendence of that. And we'll see that the perspective of the Baha'i faith is actually that same concept, namely calling for transcending the laws of nature as a struggle for existence. So first, let me briefly talk about a dream of Baha'u'llah. Baha'u'llah's revelation begins with a dream. That is the starting point. The identity of the Baha'i faith, the birth of the Baha'i faith is realized through a dream. When he was in prison, and he was in prison because of utmost injustice, oppression, and cruelty, which was being afflicted by varieties of people in response to the spiritual movement in Iran, which began by the Bab. So in the utmost situation of injustice, oppression, and cruelty, in that situation, Baha'u'llah sees a dream. And the Baha'i faith is born through this dream. But what is this dream? I write just the beginning description of this dream by Baha'u'llah himself. Baha'u'llah says, one night in a dream, these exalted words were heard on every side. So the dream is that Baha'u'llah is receiving this divine revelation. The words of God is being heard on every side. So what is this word? What is that is being communicated to Baha'u'llah? This is what Baha'u'llah is hearing. Verily, we shall render thee victorious by thyself and by thy pen. It continues with a few more statements. God asked Baha'u'llah not to be afraid because he was in prison and death was a real possibility. Others, so many others with him were already killed. So God is talking about victory, render the victorious, and the opposite of being afraid. But in any case, what is this dream? This dream is not about an indefinite, impossible future. This dream is about right present time, creation of a new culture and society right now. The basic idea of this dream is elimination of violence, elimination of the sword. So the concept of peace is central in this conception. When God is telling Baha'u'llah, verily we shall render thee victorious by thyself and by thy pen, this means that unlike many other traditions of the past, victory, including religious victory, is going to be realized only through one legitimate means. And that legitimate means, the way to promote this new spiritual culture, is first by thyself, namely the charisma, the loving character of Baha'u'llah himself, and then by his words and by thy pen. So pen replaces the sword, and the word becomes the ultimate element which would render Baha'u'llah victorious. This is immediately, in its immediate meaning, it's a very complex statement and has layers of meanings, but its immediate meaning, of course, is prohibition and rejection of any concept of the holy war, which existed in many traditions in the past. In many situations, use of violence for defending religious values, spiritual values, was acceptable. Baha'u'llah is beginning a new spiritual culture in which God is telling him that any use of sword, any use of violence is absolutely prohibited. But this prohibition of violence is accompanied with so many other elements. The fact that the cause of Baha'u'llah can be rendered victorious only through the character of Baha'u'llah and through the words, through the pen of Baha'u'llah. It means that the only way that religiosity is acceptable from now on is through free persuasion, free acceptance of the consciousness, of the conscience of the individual. Religion is entering a new stage. In the past, religion to a large extent was something which was coercively imposed on individuals by a state and by a set of clergy in their relations with the state. Usually a society was characterized with a particular religious idea and a particular church in the general sense of a religious community. And for that reason, the entire society was emphasizing a particular way of thinking and a particular way of acting. In these societies in the past, it was impossible that individuals could even think of alternative possibilities. So religion was not a matter of individual independent search or investigation. It was to a large extent a matter of inheritance. It was more or less a biological phenomenon. It was a matter of tradition, something which is there. And to a large extent, it was coercive. But this coercion was through socialization, but also many times directly by force. I'm a sociologist, and one of my areas of interest is sociology of religion. The experts in sociology of religion constantly they talk about secularization as the dominant trend of the modern society. And what they mean by that is that the age of a state and a church dominating completely the consciousness of a nation, and therefore people becoming religious and becoming members and participating in that particular religious tradition by virtue of that unity, normative and coercive of that state is over. And therefore, it is a time that individuals can think for themselves. And they say that this means that religion is dying out. And so they are talking about secularization. From a Baha'i point of view, this viewpoint in sociology of religion is very immature and very underdeveloped. Religiosity, as it existed in the past, is not really the reality of religion. Reality of religion is when we relate to our spiritual reality and we connect through our hearts and our minds, consciousness, and so on, with the ground of existence, with a spiritual reality, call it God or anything else. And so it has nothing to do with the physical, biological characteristics of human beings. And so necessarily religion, in the real sense of the term, is something which is deliberated and investigated and chosen by the mind and the heart of the individual, who relates in a mystical fashion with the spiritual reality, and not as a matter of inheritance, not an ethnic issue, not a national issue, and not definitely as a matter of imitation or habit and the like. So what is perceived as secularization from the point of view of Baha'u'llah is the emergence of a new concept of religion, and the true concept of religion. The true concept of religion, which makes religion a matter of a spirit, not a matter of biology, not a matter of body, not a matter of coercion or politics, but an encounter of human soul with the source of reality, with God. And that is a new phenomenon. Baha'u'llah's dream is speaking of the fact that the only way that Baha'i faith can be promoted is that actual human beings, through the pen of Baha'u'llah, read the writings of Baha'u'llah and think about them, meditate upon them, and if their hearts and their minds was transformed, was persuaded by the beauty and attraction and the truth of these words, then they become a Baha'i. Religiosity has no other meaning except this individual, independent investigation and choice of a spiritual consciousness. And this, of course, not only means a new stage of the spiritual development of humanity, so that the truth of religion is becoming progressively more and more apparent because human beings are becoming more and more ready for that. It also means that the order of the society needs to be changed. This is compatible now with a form of social order in which individuals are treated as the image of God, as consciousness, as spiritual beings, and therefore as equal, people who can think and should think for themselves, who should be empowered, who should be equal, and therefore a democratic form of society becomes the only logical form of regulation of many institutions of the society in the context of the dignity and nobility and independent, conscious, spiritual character of human beings, which from now on is going to be the possibility and the normative ideal. There are many other things I don't have time to discuss about this statement of Baha'u'llah. When God says to Baha'u'llah, be thou not afraid. I won't discuss that, but this is exactly the same statement which in the Quran is mentioned in description of the story of Moses. According to Torah and the Quran, when Moses is asked to throw down his staff, the staff turns into a gigantic snake. And the Quran says that when Moses saw that, he was afraid and he stood back, one step he went back. And God at this moment, according to the Quran, told Moses, be thou not afraid. La takhaf in Arabic. The exact word that God is telling Moses, now that same exact word is mentioned in this dream of Baha'u'llah to Baha'u'llah, which also implies that Baha'u'llah is Moses, that the truth of all prophets of God is one and the same. They are not different entities. They are all rays of the divine. They are all one and the same reality, and it's their human character and so on is not their truth, but their spiritual, the Holy Ghost. That is the truth of all of them, and that is one and the same. So emphasis on the unity of all religions also is part of this, so that religion, instead of becoming the cause of fanaticism and therefore the cause of violence and discrimination and sometimes even genocide, religion becomes affirmation of unity and harmony and essential unity of God, of the prophets of God, and of humanity. Again, there are many other layers of meaning in that very short dream of Baha'u'llah, but I have to stop discussing that, otherwise I can't discuss anything else. But I want now to discuss the letters that Baha'u'llah sent to the leaders of the world, and inviting them to a spiritual culture and inviting them to peace. This is, of course, continuation and realization of that same dream that I discussed already, which was the moment of the birth of the Baha'i faith. So in the writings of Baha'u'llah, what we see is that peace is no longer just a moral statement. It's not just the idea that peace is good, war is bad. That, of course, is fundamental there. Baha'u'llah is emphasizing the spiritual truth of reality, the spiritual truth of humanity, and therefore defining that what is the law of jungle is unworthy of human beings. So that element, of course, is there like past traditions. However, we have in the discussion of peace a new orientation. From the point of view of Baha'u'llah, humanity has entered a new stage of its development, one in which peace is both possible and absolutely imperative. It's no longer a discussion of an indefinite future or the end of the time. It's not just a poetic statement. It is a concrete discussion of particular measures, institutional, social, economic, political, cultural changes that must take place in order to create peace. For Baha'u'llah, in those letters, the premise is that he says, for instance, he says, regard ye the world as one human body. فَانْظُرُوا الْعَالَمَ كَهَيْكَلِ إِنسَانٍ is the original word of Baha'u'llah. Regard ye the world as one human body. What Baha'u'llah is saying to the leaders of the world is what now we call it globalization. Baha'u'llah wrote those letters in 1868, so it's a long time before even the word globalization would exist. But what Baha'u'llah is saying is that not nations, not societies are organic entities, namely different aspects are interdependent and interconnected and together create an organic unity. Baha'u'llah is talking now of the world, the entire world becoming an organic unity. And he's writing to the leaders of the world because of this new situation. And he's arguing that then peace right now is the absolute, is both possible and is absolutely urgent. Humanity has to decide to destroy itself completely, or that it acts in terms of the requirement of the time. In the past traditions, the dream of peace was a miraculous event. It was a miracle. It had nothing to do with the actuality or reality of the society or history. For Baha'u'llah, the requirements of time now is peace. Humanity just has to awaken its a spiritual orientation and looks at the world and figure out that this is the only way now. For me, the letters of Baha'u'llah to leaders of the world, he addresses many of them, and he has letters specifically, for instance, to Queen Victoria of England. He has a letter to the Pope. He has a letter to the King of Iran. He has a letter to the Ottoman Sultan. He has a letter to Napoleon III and to the Tsar of Russia and many others. And sometimes he addresses in general leaders of the world. For me, it is very interesting to contrast this letter of Baha'u'llah to the leaders of the world, calling them to spiritual consciousness and to peace, with the most interesting pioneer letter written to political leaders by a prominent author. What I mean is what was written in 16th century by Machiavelli. Machiavelli wrote his work, Prince, as a letter to the king, to the political leaders in that part of Florence and the surrounding area. But what Machiavelli's prince is telling the prince is that a realization of power and total dominance of the king at any expense, at any price, is legitimate. That everything is okay to be used. Really, it's the logic of the struggle for existence. Every lie, every trick, every genocide, every abuse, every deception is absolutely necessary, and in his understanding, in a sense, became moral. Every immoral act becomes moral if it serves the dominance of the prince. Colonialism is a beautiful thing, but it has to be done in a way which is correct. Sometimes, according to him, genocide of the dominated is necessary in order to make sure that the rule of the prince would not be questioned. Political science, and to a large extent, the concept of politics and modernity begins with this letter of Machiavelli. Here we have Baha'u'llah. He's an ordinary man, but at the same time, he's the absolute sovereign. He is the manifestation of God. He's the one who is bringing the message of God. So he writes to the kings, both as an ordinary man who is in prison, and at the same time as this sovereign, the real king, the king of all the kings. But his message is not for enforcement of coercion, particularistic interests, nationalism, racism, colonialism, and the like. His message is to awaken the spiritual consciousness of the world and to invite them to universal peace. But peace, because it's no longer just a moral statement, it is the requirements of the time, becomes inseparable from varieties of measures, ideas, and so on. So very briefly, I address a few of them in 5 minutes, and hopefully in 5 minutes, and then there will be a possibility of some discussions and so on. One of the most important elements that Baha'u'llah is discussing is what we call it collective security. Baha'u'llah is saying that the leaders of the world should come together, and in a democratic fashion, they decide in a consensus about the borders of different countries and so on. And they should limit the amount of weapons, their armaments, to what is needed only for peace and security inside their country. In other words, arms, militarism, and arms race, and so on, which has been the dominant story of modernity and politics and international relations and so on, that arms race has to be replaced by collective security, limitations of weapons. So many times Baha'u'llah says that in all his writings, not just there, he calls for, to use his own words, Salah should be converted to Islah. Means of destruction, weapons of destruction, should be converted to means of reconstructions, means of peacemaking. So what Baha'u'llah is saying is that we have to go beyond the existing nationalistic structure of the world, and that there should become a sort of federal, global institutions of the world, in which varieties of parts of the world are independent parts of this federal structure, but the arms race would be eliminated, and the collective security is realized, and so it becomes a politics of unity in diversity. And this is very important because increasingly we realize that if we don't deceive ourselves, globalization as a reality requires that we go beyond the existing identities and institutional arrangements, tribal, national, and so on, that we have right now. Look at what happened in Ukraine and Russia. We thought that if societies become a little bit more civilized, a little bit more democratic, and so on, you are going to have peace. But we can see how fragile that it is and how everything can be abused and how everything can change and so on. The institutional structure has to change. Peace is not just a matter of giving slogans that it is good, war is bad. Peace requires changing patterns of interactions and relations. Institutional arrangements should be changed. The other element that Baha'u'llah is emphasizing is political democracy. In his letter to the Queen Victoria, Baha'u'llah begins by praising Queen Victoria for two policies. One, he says, is abolishing slavery, and the second one, he says, expanding the democratic voting of the public. And both of them, of course, are absolutely true, which means that Baha'u'llah, a prisoner, but yet he knew very well what is happening in the world. In Baha'u'llah's writing, for instance, in his letter to Queen Victoria, he defines political democracy as the will of God. In that same tablet, in that same set of letters and so on, Baha'u'llah says something I want to share with you. He's talking about the kings of the world that are exploiting their people, robbing them of all their resources in order to waste that with varieties of expenditures by these kings. And he says that this is utter injustice. Then he says a statement I want to read for you and explain it a little bit. He says, he's addressing these autocratic kings, these monarchs. He says, by them, namely by your people, by the citizens, by the people of the country that you rule over them, by them ye rule, by their means ye subsist, by their aid ye conquer, yet how disdainfully ye look upon them, how strange, how very strange. In its original Arabic is much more direct. It says that by them ye rule, by them you subsist and accumulate wealth, by them ye conquer, yet how disdainfully you look upon them, how strange. This is a philosophy, a political philosophy of democracy. But Baha'u'llah is saying to these kings, to these tyrants, is that your power is actually the power of the people. Your wealth is the power of the people. The fact that you can conquer and have political power, that is really power of the people. It's power of the people which now is mystified and appears as the power of this monarch. If people don't produce, if people don't participate, and so on, no monarch, no tyrant would have ever any power, any wealth, anything. Political power ultimately everywhere and at all times is really the power of the people. But it is mystified, and so it appears as if it is the power of one person, monarch. And then this one person monarch becomes very kind and gives a little power, a little right to the people. But for Baha'u'llah, it is the exact opposite. That means that the truth of political power is democracy, because always power belongs to the people. And so these oppressive patterns of these tyrants, he says that how strange, how very strange, because it is the exact opposite of the reality. Political democracy is very important because all research in political science, in international relations, has shown that democracy is compatible with the higher likelihood of peace. if two countries are democratic, according to all the statistics and so on, the likelihood of violent means of solving problems decreases, and peaceful solution, democratic peaceful solution of problems, disagreements, and so on increases. So, of course, democracy has different levels. And so the more really democratic a society becomes, namely people really decide, people are the ones who are going to be murdered, to lose their sons and daughters and their properties and so on. The kings are not. And so if really, truly a democratic principle would be realized, that would decrease the chance of war. However, none of these things are by themselves sufficient to guarantee peace, but it's an important element. When I talked about that federal commonwealth, when I talked about collective security, what Baha'u'llah is doing is extending the concept of democracy to the international level. Those people who have talked about democracy, at the most, they are affirming it at the level of nation state. But in the globalized world in which we live, most of the events are determined in between societies, not within a domestic situation. That means that if political decision-making is democratic within the societies, still people are not deciding their destiny, because most events are not decided at the domestic level. It is in between societies because of the global structure of the world. And so Baha'u'llah's call for creation of these global institutions, democratic institutions, which creates that collective security, is at the same time reaffirmation of the concept of democracy. The other element that he is emphasizing in these letters is social justice. And what I read for you, addressing the kings and tyrants and so on, that that they have to recognize that everything is product of the people, and it is utter injustice what they are doing, the extremes of inequalities which exist in these societies and so on. That is another very important institutional requirement of peace at the level of countries themselves and at the international global level. Another very important element, of course, is the culture of peace. In addition to these changes in the economic, political, institutional, international structures of the world, a new way of looking at other people has to emerge. And this culture of peace is the content of almost everything that Baha'u'llah discusses. So for Baha'u'llah, the time has come that humanity recognizes the truth of human beings, namely our spiritual consciousness. In all spiritual traditions, it is emphasized. In the first page of Torah, it is mentioned that God made humans in his own image. What a beautiful, powerful, insightful, rich concept. If we understand the truth of Torah, that human beings are made in the image of God, true understanding of that, which means that everybody is a reflection of God, everybody is a spiritual being, and the truth of all of us is one and the same, then there is no room for racism. Racism means that the truth of human being is defined in terms of our biological characteristic, and not really biological characteristic, but a very superficial color of skin, which has no reality either, a pure illusion. Patriarchy has no room within a consciousness which believes that humans are image of God. Because if we are image of God, God is not a biological entity. God is not male. God is not female. God is a spiritual reality. Therefore, to be biologically male or female has nothing to do with the truth of human beings. And so the worth of human beings, the truth of human beings, should not be related to the color of skin, to the place of birth, to the ethnicity, to the masculinity or femininity of an individual, and many other accidents like that and so on. In other words, Baha'u'llah is asking what Jesus asked. The message of Jesus was that we should be reborn, but this time born of spirit. Just as our body is born, but now we have to be born in a spiritual fashion. That is the message of the Isaiah. Isaiah is talking of a dream in which the law of struggle for existence ceases to be. And although at the level of nature itself, this is impossible, but Isaiah is writing in a poetic, metaphorical fashion. The idea is that human being now would transcend the realm of struggle for existence, that transcend the realm of jungle, would not see themselves just purely as a material biological entity, would awaken their spiritual consciousness, discover their spiritual truth, see themselves and every other person as the image of God. Therefore, everybody becomes one, everybody becomes beautiful, everybody becomes sacred, and the whole world becomes the image of God. It's not just human beings, nature becomes also a reflection of God. In Baha'i writings, all beings are mirrors of the divine. Everything is reflection of the divine. In other words, Baha'u'llah is saying that the time has come that humanity would enter a new spiritual stage, to become emancipated from its biological, natural character, from the law of struggle for existence. And therefore, the regulating principle of society becomes principles of a spirit, becomes principle of love, principle of unity in diversity, principle of reason. So justice, rationality, love, unity in diversity, seeing each other not as a stranger, not as enemy, but seeing each other as one. In this situation, diversity becomes beautiful. In the world that we are right now, diversity is either an element for mutual hatred, or if people want to define diversity in a positive fashion, indirectly they reduce human beings again to these biological, social, natural characteristics. By reducing the truth of a person to the race of a person, to the gender of a person, to the nationality of a person, to the language of the person, and so on, indirectly this culture would separate humans more, defines others either as enemy or a stranger. For Baha'u'llah, we have to move towards unity in diversity. Recognize that the truth of us is image of God. It's not our body, it's not our ethnicity, it's not our nationality, language, and so on. That is not our truth. Our truth is spiritual, and we are all one. recognizing that unity and oneness, then differences that we have in terms of cultures, ethnicity, and so on becomes beautiful. And then this diversity should become a cause for interaction and communication, enhancing unity, this unity in diversity, rather than diversity becomes something that we reduce our identity to that, see others as different, as strangers, or as enemies. Sometimes we justify hatred of the others in the name of rejecting patriarchy or rejecting racism or the like. And then we define another race, whatever that race is, as evil. The message of Baha'u'llah, therefore, is that we have entered a new stage. We have to go beyond materialistic politics, materialistic ideology, discover our spiritual truth, and discover sacredness and beauty of everybody, of all races, of all genders, of all cultures, of all languages, of all religions. The truth is one and the same. And in this consciousness and love, this universal love for every group, not just my group, universal love for every group, because we understand that we are all one. There is no stranger. So statement of Baha'u'llah, sometimes this is a sort of manifesto of the Baha'i faith. I know the original statement by heart, but the translation would be something like Baha'u'llah addressing the humanity says that the tabernacle of unity has been raised. Tabernacle of unity has been raised. Regarding not each other as strangers. There is no stranger. The time, the age of looking at each other as strangers from the point of view of Baha'u'llah is over. We are all one. This is that culture. This is the way we look at others and so on, which is necessary for peace. So the dream of peace becomes now a possibility, an urgent possibility, which is in accordance with the requirement of time. It's not something impossible or unpractical, but the ultimate expression of the development of the dynamic potentialities of human spirituality at this particular stage of humanity's development.
Wow. Thank you very much, Dr. Saiedi. I don't know how to thank you, but reminds me you belong to a group of, among the other group, that Baha'u'llah praises very much, that this group or this individuals, they defend the faith and they remove the misunderstanding of the other peoples about this precious faith. And among them, we can see Abul Faza'il Golpaigani and other people, and Dr. Nader Saiedi, truly by his writings, not by the other things, really by his pen. We thank you very, very much. And I'll pass this to Alex. Go ahead, Alex. Wow.
Thank you, Dr. Saiedi, for your presentation this evening. We have a number of questions in the chat. I'm hoping we have enough time to get to them here. I want to be sensitive of your time and our attendance's time. For the first question, the author writes, I'm paraphrasing, of course. In your talk, you mentioned that Baha'u'llah sort of redefined religion to focus more on the spiritual connections and the investigation of a spiritual consciousness. What are the sociological implications of this redefinition for the structure and functioning of society?
Well, I mean, that question is a beautiful question, and it has so many dimensions, impossible really to answer it very briefly. But as I mentioned, the previous pattern of religion was something in which religion was not really a matter of a spirit. Religion was a matter of imitation and following tradition, like a biological fact, and it was coercively imposed both through socialization and through coercive arrangements to people. So people could not even think of anything else. And that meant that they identified themselves with their own society, and religion was actually solidarity of their own group as opposed to others, and so on. And many times we were talking about peace. Many times some of the people would define their own religion as the abode of peace, and would define other religions as the abode of war. A number of Muslim writers, not understanding the truth of Islam, they made this distinction. So the word of Islam becomes Darul Islam, abode of Islam and abode of peace. And the rest of that becomes Darul Harb, the abode of war. In other words, not only religion was not something spiritual, it became an instrument for distinction and separation within the world, and sometimes an oppressive justification for war, for discriminations, and the like. Racism, patriarchy, slavery was many times supported by a lot of clerics of traditional religions, although these are opposed to the spiritual truth of our religions, but that was a way of understanding religion in which the truth of religion was conceived. So when Baha'u'llah is talking about religiosity as something which should be based upon, his first teaching is independent investigation of truth. And his last teaching is oneness of humanity. And these two are inseparable from each other. Independent investigation of truth emphasizes our individuality. We should not be in blind conformity to anyone or any authority. We are a spirit of God. We are image of God. We have to think for ourselves. But that reality means emerging as a spiritual being. And that means recognizing at the same time the spiritual truth of all humanity. And therefore, that independence at the same time creates that unity and solidarity, not of my group, not of my religious group, not of my nation, not of my race, not of my gender, but solidarity and unity of the entire world. And so the democratic element battled against varieties of arbitrary, meaningless, senseless forms of oppression, whether it is based upon color of skin of people, or masculinity or femininity of the people, or where they are born, or the caste-like oppression and division and discrimination of the people, and so on. They all would be eliminated within this new orientation, new definition of human beings as spiritual beings, in which religion becomes a matter of soul's relation to God, rather than society and state and clerics and so on dictating that to them. In so many parts of the world, in the country that I come from, Iran, the law of apostasy is such a dominant law. Law of apostasy means that if you change your religion, you have to die. If you change your religion from Islam, you have to be killed. Now, this means that there is absolutely no awareness of what religion is among these clerics who are controlling Iran. Because the whole idea of religion is the free, open encounter of soul with God, with the truth of God. And yet, the moment that this freedom of conscience is exercised, these religious leaders condemn you to death. In other words, for them, religion is something which is a matter of blood. You are born in this place with these fathers and so on. You have to be like that. That is their conception of religion. So religion becomes an instrument for promoting particularistic, oppressive, political interests in the world. The true religion, the message of God and Spirit, is the exact opposite of all these things. And that is why so many clerics are the first to oppose the message of Baha'u'llah, because they want to find the power and interest in their traditional distortion of the concept of religion.
Thank you. And then for our next question, focusing in on Baha'u'llah's letters to the kings, do we know of any other such instances during the time of Baha'u'llah in which other individuals were writing to all the kings of the world, especially individuals that were currently imprisoned or recently imprisoned at the time? And then the second part of that question is, for those looking to learn more about that particular time in Baha'i history, do you recommend any particular resource in order to learn about the responses that were received and how the rulers either took actions or did not take actions, and what happened to them?
In terms of the first question, I'm sure that a lot of people have written letters to the rulers. Many times, I'm sure it has been just asking for pardon or things like that. Usually, there has been, of course, philosophers and intellectuals also who have written something which is literature for that, to tell the rulers how to rule and so on. And there is a history of that in varieties of cultures and so on. The best of them is, of course, that Machiavelli's letter that I mentioned. In Iran, Siyasatname, the book of Siyasatname, namely the letter concerning politics, the art of politics, written by Nizamul Mulk, is very important. All Iranians know that. Although the content of that has a lot of negative elements as well, but in specifically about 19th century, who has written what and so on, is a specialized question. I was thinking in my mind whether I can locate particular persons or events and so on, and not much came to my mind, but I'm sure there has been. In terms of response of the leaders of the world to Baha'u'llah, we don't have enough information. Most of them just ignored the message of Baha'u'llah. And the fact that the world increasingly has become in a worse situation in terms of varieties of aspects of that, including international relations, arms race, and so on, by itself is a testimony to the fact that they did not accept and pay attention to the message of God.
Understood. And then that leaves us for our final questions for the evening. And speaking of all of the teachings and foundational elements that Baha'u'llah laid out within his writings, how do we know that humanity is ready for more profound spiritual investigation as laid out in the writings of Baha'u'llah?
Well, when we look at the world, everything has changed. Because I'm a sociologist, the task of sociologists is to discuss modernity, post-modernity, nationalism, globalism. We see that from 18th century onward, the world was completely transformed. It began, of course, in West European societies, but it became a global phenomenon. Everything has changed. We have now moved towards an industrial society, and now even we have surpassed that industrial society. We had scientific revolution. Science was not something, did not exist in the past. It was the same as religion, as philosophy, and so on. But now we have science separated from philosophy, from religion, politics, and so on. And we have witnessed the miracle of the development of science in varieties of fields of human endeavor. Urbanization, communication revolution, transportation. I mean, every aspect of the world that you look at it, emergence of political democracy increasingly in different parts of the world, emergence of the social movements by the oppressed segments of the world who are asking for recognition as a human being, and the rise of protests against colonialism and imperialism. We look at colonialism and imperialism, of course, everybody agrees that it is a bad thing right now. But what people don't know is that up to a century ago, 2 centuries ago, everybody praised colonialism and imperialism. Everybody loved colonialism and imperialism. People were proud that their country has colonized so many parts of the world, has conquered so many parts of the world. Their heroes, national heroes, are these brutal people who could go and engage in war and plunder different places and conquer different places and so on. The idea that colonialism is a bad thing, is an immoral thing, is an evil thing, and so on, did not exist in the past. The idea that males are superior to women and so on, and this is natural, was the dominant idea among philosophers, not only just ordinary people, among the philosophers. So the whole world has changed. Humanity has entered really a new station. And the truth of this is that the world is longing for justice, nobility of human beings, recognition of rights of human beings, and so on. But this, of course, in its truth, is recognition of the spiritual character of human beings. Because as it is right now in the world, that we are becoming more materialistic in our philosophy and consciousness, and yet we are asking for nobility of human beings and recognition of that nobility among all groups of people. These have tensions with each other. If we are simply a material natural being, then Darwinistic idea of a struggle for existence becomes more natural way of living. Namely, we are part of nature. The operating principle of life and society in nature is the struggle for existence. That means colonialism, racism, all kinds of wars, all these things become natural and should be supported in a sense. We, as humanity right now, are in a schizophrenic consciousness. On the one hand, we are recognizing the necessity of rights, equality, justice for everybody in the world. And yet, at the same time, we think that this worldview should be based upon a materialistic, naturalistic consciousness in which God, a spiritual character of human being, and so on, are all banished and exiled. These two are opposites of each other. And so one of the most powerful, beautiful elements of the message of Baha'u'llah was that it is the spiritual consciousness ultimately, which is the foundation for this new world order of justice and peace that humanity longs for right now, but has not attained the right kind of consciousness. And so Baha'u'llah is trying to create that new form of consciousness so that humanity changes, reconstructs all forms of life and institutions, and so on. My final word, I talked about the dream of Baha'u'llah. You remember? And the dream of Baha'u'llah was that God told Baha'u'llah that verily we shall render thee victorious by thyself and by thy pen. What is beautiful about this event is that this is the utmost situation of oppression and injustice. Baha'u'llah's imprisonment and the way he was treated there. But then the response to this oppression becomes peace, becomes love. It is easy in the world to defend peace and justify peace in terms of violence. We have to hate the oppressors and kill them and eliminate them. And so every kind of violence becomes easily justified in the name of peace, in the name of justice. The dream of Baha'u'llah has, in addition with a lot of characteristics that I mentioned, has this additional characteristics in which realization of peace requires also peaceful means. You cannot create peace through more hating, through more dehumanizing. So peace becomes a matter of actual living on all different aspects of life. To create peace requires this peace as means, as method of life, rather than an abstract idea that now justifies all kinds of killings, all kinds of discriminations, all kinds of violence, and so on. That is another expression of the materialistic worldview. When you have materialistic worldview, you become conscious of the necessity of justice or peace, but the means of realizing that is to hate more. That is one of the illnesses of the world. And Baha'u'llah's message and that dream of Baha'u'llah is pointing towards a different way.
Wow. Alex, thanks again, Dr. Saiedi, very much for this wonderful, wonderful presentation. Michael, are you ready?
Yes,
You
just a
have to
moment.
unmute yourself.
No. Okay. Yeah, just a moment. Let me open the book. Remove not, O Lord, the festal board that hath been spread in thy name, and extinguish not the burning flame that hath been kindled by thine unquenchable fire. Withhold not from flowing that living water of thine, that murmureth with the melody of thy glory and thy remembrance, and deprive not thy servants from the fragrance of the sweetness of thy sweet savors, breathing forth the perfume of thy love. Lord, turn the distressing cares of thy holy ones into ease, their hardship into comfort, their abasement into glory, their sorrow into blissful joy, O thou that holdest in thy grasp the reins of all mankind. Thou art verily the one, the single, the mighty, the all-knowing, the all-wise.
Thank you very much, Michael. Alex?